Good morning, Anna. How are you?
I'm great, Jamie. How are you?
Yeah, really good, really good. Well, it's a pleasure to have the chance to talk to you. We've done the usual sort of interactions online, and I've obviously followed your work at Sentient Media for a long while. So it's great to have the chance to have a conversation. And I interviewed Miko Yavanpar, who you work closely with as well. So again, it's great to get someone else from the Sentient Media team onto the
No,
guest list here.
yeah, it's awesome to be here. Awesome to be a guest, and yeah, I'm sure our conversation will be quite different from the one you had with Miko, who's much more like philosophically minded and much better read than I am. But yeah, we've been working together for the last just over two and a half years now, more or less. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's been an awesome journey at Sentient Media.
So he's deep in the jargon and the books, and you're a bit more grounded in common sense and down to earth.
Well, yeah, that'd be one way to put it for
We'll
sure.
find out, and we'll get some feedback from Miko if he listens to this as well.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, this is a series of conversations about what I think of as the two deepest and most important philosophical questions: what's real? How should we think about reality in the universe, and what and who matters? And I've got an obvious bias because I'm trying to popularize and develop this really simple worldview called Sentientism, which suggests that when we're thinking about what's real, we should use evidence and reason to work out what to believe. And when it comes to thinking about who gets to matter ethically, the clue is in the name. We should have compassion for all sentient beings, any being that has the capacity to suffer or flourish or to feel anything, really. But I'm talking to people in these conversations, as you know, who both agree and disagree with that worldview. So it'll be fascinating to understand how you think about these crazily big questions. But before we get on to those, how would you best introduce yourself and your work?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. So I'm Anna Bradley. I'm the executive director at Sentient Media. And if you're not aware of Sentient Media, we're a non-profit journalism outlet, and we report on animals, climate, farming, those kind of topics. And essentially, our mission is to create transparency around the suffering that's inside our global food systems. So usually this is invisible suffering. We don't see it reported in the media. We don't see it when we go to the supermarket to buy our food. And what we want to do is inspire our readers and the community around us to start thinking more about the repercussions of what we eat. So yeah, that would be a summation of the work I do at Sentient Media.
Yeah, brilliant. It's such a distinctive voice in the media. And I think our joint aspiration is that it becomes less unusual over time as the
Yeah,
cultural defaults shift. But let's see. And you're
yeah,
also a fellow podcaster as well because of the Sentient Media podcast. So I'd point people at that too, of course.
yeah. The Sentient Media podcast, something that I wish I had more time to apply to. But yeah, essentially, I usually do one a month at the moment. I'd love to ramp that up if time allows.
Yeah.
But yeah, thinking about like the media and as you said, like Sentient Media is a distinctive voice because there isn't much coverage. I always like to, like, if I'm interviewing or if I'm being interviewed, I just like to ask a very quick question, which is, Jamie, when was the last time you saw farmed animal news in mainstream media with farmed animals being centered as like the feature of the story? Does anything come to mind?
I'm really struggling to think of anything. Yeah. I mean, the only time I think is where I can think of is maybe with a farmed animal escape. So
Mm.
if a pig escapes from a truck on its way to the slaughterhouse, that's the only time where people seem to switch instantaneously into empathizing with that being and thinking what it would be like for them, and people are cheering for them to, survive and go to a sanctuary.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but otherwise, it's generally, they're a commodity, they're an object, and even when the term welfare is used, it's more of a second-hand sort of, we as humans are going to be generous to not egregiously harming them. It's still not
Mm.
really thinking of them as sentient beings in their own right. It's a sort of a second-hand, weird, dominion-like, okay, fine, we won't harm you too much, but it's not really empathizing. So I think it's deeply
Yeah.
rare. Yeah.
I think it is too. And at Sentient Media, obviously, we have a global team. We track news, we track what's being reported on, and we have all these Slack channels with all these the latest stories that have come out. And animals, like it can be about fishing, it can be about migrant workers being abused, it can be about like you say, an individual animal that escapes, or it can be about companion animals, about dogs and cats and their issues. Or we do see more reporting on wildlife as well, but
Yeah.
very rarely do we see anything that actually centers farmed animals. And when you think of the number of, the quantity of farmed animals that are out there, at least 72 billion land animals, more than a trillion, aquatic animals. it becomes really alarming to think that we're not reporting on this in a way that allows people to think about it or to consider these animals that are have been proven scientifically to have feelings and sentience for many of the animals that we consider food. So sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I think we'll come back to that when we talk about the future as well, because it's a central mindset shift of just recognizing these beings matter intrinsically in their own right. And it's such a simple idea, but it's so broken in the default human worldview and in our media. It's and once you've got it, it makes you feel like you're an alien living on a strange planet surrounded by, almost people who think in such a radically different way. It's quite hard to rationalize it sometimes, but yeah. But I love the work you're doing. I think it's deeply distinctive, and I obviously have an enormous bias for any organization with the word sentient in its title. Yay. So yeah, exactly. Well, let's get into those two big philosophical questions, and to pull back from the sort of ethics and the animal topics. The first question is, what's real and how should we go about believing things? So for many of my guests, that's a story about whether they grew up in maybe a more mystical, supernatural, maybe religious context, family and society, or one that was already quite naturalistic and maybe atheist, agnostic, scientifically minded, and how that side of their thinking's changed over time, if it has. So yeah, you can wind the clock back as far as you like, and be fascinating to know your story about how you developed that side of your thinking and how you think about it now.
Yeah, it's a great and deep and big question, and I guess I'll wind the clock back to my first kind of memories and moments where I started to consider existence and life outside of myself, I guess. So I was 6 when I made the connection about animals on the plate and animals suffering, and
wow.
to me it was just completely obvious, I guess. At that age, it was like, yeah, of course animals have feelings. Like, why would we think they didn't? And why would we think they don't have their own languages? Like, of course they have their own languages, of course we don't understand them. It just seemed to me to be totally obvious. So yeah, I was lucky, I've spoken about this before, I was lucky that my parents supported me in that. So when I kind of started to make connections, they told me the truth. They didn't lie about anything or try and make it like, oh well, it's just what we eat. They told me about the complexities within it, and they supported me in going vegetarian and then eventually vegan. But my family were eating meat. But as far as like religion goes, it's I never had a conversation with my parents, to my memory, about God or about there being some kind of ethereal being. It just wasn't part of our conversations. But I went to a C of E, I went to a Church of England primary school, so I was exposed in that way. Like, there was a church attached to the school, but I never saw it as anything other than kind of just like fun and like a sense of community or whatever. But there was never any. I never believed in there being, I guess, this idea of a man sitting in the clouds or whatever. Like, that just was so unappealing and uninteresting to me. I was much more interested in animals and in nature. And I guess, like, my parents are not religious, but we did celebrate, Christian holidays, so Easter, Christmas. But I guess, interestingly, we kind of tied it to like pagan festivals. So we always celebrated the solstice and the equinox, and I still do. So, my dad and I, we don't do it anymore, but we used to go for like a big long sunrise to sunset walk every winter solstice, and we'd come home and have a big, winter stew,
awesome.
The sunshine stew, we call it. So, we've always kind of celebrated those things. And as a younger person, I guess I must have been like, I don't know, 10 or something. I started to think about Wicca and Wiccan religion. So I looked at, essentially all of it kind of ties to nature. It all ties to like a respect for the beings around us, a respect for the land, a respect for, for humans, for animals, for plants. And I guess it's hard for me to kind of think about exactly, how that came about in my mind, but it just seems like it always just kind of flowed naturally. And I still have, beliefs today of, respecting nature and respecting animals and respecting the world around us. I don't practice any religion aspect of that, but I guess there's that ritual aspect of like, respecting the solstice and honoring those shorter and longer days and those transitions. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
That's a kind of a whistle stop tour.
No, that's fascinating. Thank you. So you weren't brought up religious. There was a Christian school, but you never bought into any of the supernatural beliefs. There were stories and there was communities and there were ritual, and you've enjoyed, adaptations of those rituals, and then, things like the solstices going forward, and you feel this sense of connection to nature and so on. You've explored those. So that's a fascinating story. The way you feel now, with that connection to nature and non-human animals, there's a load of different ways of describing that and different paths to it and implications of it. So for some people, that is quite a supernatural thing. There's a sense of something magical going on, or a transcendent connection, or something beyond just the physical and the biological that comes through their sense of, what nature is and how we're all connected. For other people like me, I'm just a really boring sort of naturalistic. That sense of awe and wonder and connectedness is purely a scientific thing. I just think it's ultimately all physics and biology and chemistry, but that doesn't take any of the wonder and awe away. It's just completely naturalistic. I don't think there's any magic there. Can you pass which of those paths, or a blend of the two, you feel you think now?
I don't think I ever, it's really weird. Like, I don't think I ever believed in magic, in the sense of like an ethereal, I'm thinking back to when I was younger and I had my I built a little altar with the elements, air, water, fire, etc. And I had a little wand from a little willow branch I found or whatever. And that, you would say, is me believing in magic. But I didn't believe in, I guess, like any kind of fanciful feeling that I had at that age. Like, I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in some ethereal thing going on, but I do believe that nature, animals, like all of us, have incredible power and have incredible roles to play in the kind of existence of our planet. And that could be described as magical, but I believe it's weighted in science, in reason and logic, because we're talking about, like, the relationship in biodiversity, the relationship between the ant and the trees, and the anteater. I'm talking about like the whole like global picture of existence, which is real, but it's so, I guess it's so magnificent in a way, and so important and so connected to each other, that's could be kind of seen as a kind of a magical thing, but it's real. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my previous guests said, reality is awesome enough. We don't need to make stuff up. I think, some people have this sense that scientific way of understanding the world is sort of cold and clinical and unemotional, and detaches everything and puts everything in little separate boxes. And I don't think it has to be like that at all. I think scientific understanding of reality is completely consistent with the way you describe that sense of awe and wonder and connectedness. And some people might use more mystical language to describe that, but
no, but I believe, I believe in the kind of in the reality of it. Like, we just finished watching David Attenborough's Life of Plants. Did you see that?
I haven't seen that yet. No,
it's just incredible. Like, like plants are just like animals in slow motion. The way that they film it, and just all of these incredible things that plants are doing that you're not aware of, and the incredible kind of delicate balance of the the ecosystems, that is real. And it is amazing. And I think that's what I always gravitated towards, in the sense of that's what I wanted to believe in. And I didn't understand anybody who could just stand on a spider, or stand on an ant, or even, like, I remember as a kid down our street, it's a terraced house, and they used to, on the pavements, they used to do weed killer, and on the little bits of grass that come up, so valiantly through these paving stones, and they would just kill them. And I always remember as a kid, like, just being so sad, like, why are we killing these little weeds? I don't know. It all sounds a bit like a bit airy fairy now I'm talking about it, but I
love it. Yeah. So that probably covers the what's real question. I think it's pretty straightforward. Thank you. And it's also interesting because I think it's becoming more and more common that people are brought up by default in a naturalistic way of thinking, whereas people of my generation and others, it was actually pretty rare. Most people by default started out with some sort of religious worldview, and many of them have moved away from it. But I think over time it's getting much more common that people grow up with a naturalistic way of thinking and then just stick with it, because frankly, I don't think there's any better way of understanding the world. But
yeah.
So let's come on to the next big question: what matters? So one challenge that's often to put to people like you and me with a broadly naturalistic way of thinking, particularly if they have a religious worldview, for example, they'll say, look, we have a God, and God defines good and bad, and will ultimately judge us. We also have books, the Quran, the Bible, or whatever it is, with lists of rules that defines what good or bad is. We have an objective standard. Now, I'd claim that standard is fabricated and therefore is no more objective than anything else, but it is at least a list. They've got something they can point to. But they might turn to a naturalistic person and say, well, what have you got? Right? You've got no grounding for your ethics. What can good and bad and right and wrong even mean to you? So I don't know if you've ever faced that challenge, but how would you respond to that sort of challenge? What's the raw material of morality for you? Why does anything matter?
Yeah, I guess in the sense of, again, back to this idea of the power of nature and the power of our relationship, on the planet, that's what you would look to. That's what I've always looked to, in the sense of understanding why we should be respectful, why we should be protecting and supporting communities and diversity, biodiversity. And I guess the kind of the ritual of the earth and the sun and the moon and these kind of these are based in a kind of a naturalistic way of thinking. It's science, but it's also a respect for the power and the aura of nature. I guess in reality, my response to somebody who was, if they came to me with that, and then I my response would probably be more a question back to them would be more well, how can you have such complexity and such different approaches to how you practice your religion within one religion? So there are so many different ways of practicing Christianity. There are so many ways of of practicing all of the different faiths that we have. That why is it so hard to believe that somebody who puts their kind of belief and faith in science and in the world around us, why is it so hard to believe that is implausible? I guess.
Yeah. And one of the challenges with that sort of, think about nature as a grounding of morality is that some people will take that in a very different way to the path that you and I take, which is they'll say, look, we should respect nature and its processes. It's an awesome, wonderful thing. But within nature, there are cycles and patterns and ecosystems, and predation is a natural part of that process. Survival of the fittest. Humans are the apex predator. So I'm going to have my Big Mac because basically that's the analog of me being a lion eating a gazelle in the savannah. So isn't that aren't I, with that ethical view, respecting nature and it's the circle of life?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously that's a question that, just thinking about veganism and people who choose to not eat meat, that path, that's obviously well, what about lions? I'm a lion, etc. Yeah, lol. I feel like it's a defensive, attack, really. And I think that the response to that is obviously that, well, okay, let's look in nature and let's look at how, I mean, there are discoveries and there is, truth to the fact that ants and termites and some other animals do kind of farm other beings, but not to the extent that we do, and not to such detriment of the environment around them as we do. So I guess, when you're eating your Big Mac, that's hardly the same as going out into the savannah and chasing down a gazelle and killing it with your bare teeth. There's quite a big difference. And yeah, I guess it's kind of just one of those arguments that you come up against a lot, like protein, all of these little attacks that people want to make on those who kind of threaten their way of justifying what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's part of a portfolio of amazing mental gymnastics that people use to post-rationalize just not changing and doing what they've been indoctrinated to do. And I know that because I did it for many decades myself. It was part of a portfolio of cognitive techniques you can use. So I think that is true. I think it's also interesting that people very rarely apply that ethical standard, survival of the most violent, apex predators, if it's natural, it's good. They very rarely apply that to human ethics because, it's very clear that if you look out into nature, many, many awful things are completely normal, rape, infanticide, murder, outgroup, genocide. If you're going to use nature as an ethical standard, the horror of applying that to other sentient beings and to other humans is pretty, clear. So what I think people tend to do is that they'll use that sort of, well, we should use nature as a model when it comes to thinking about humans and how we should treat non-humans, excluding companion animals, of course.
Of course.
But it would be horrific to allow us to apply that to human ethics. But of course, some awful humans, do apply exactly that logic to other humans. And it is survival of the most violent, and it is in-group, out-group aggression. And we know where that leads. So it's really interesting that even in the response to say, look, let's use nature as an ethical standard, they're applying a completely different ethics to intrahuman ethics than they are to intrasentient ethics. And I think that shows the lie. And I think part of the answer to it, which I think will come on to the next question, is that, my view is nature is awesome, but it is not ethically good or ethically bad. There's compassion and there's love and there's all sorts of positive things and the evolution of cooperation within nature. There's loads of good stuff, but there's loads of absolutely sickening, horrific stuff as well. You look at, the average life of a wild animal, particularly if it's a species that's an R strategist, which basically says, let's have as many kids as possible, and then maybe a couple of them will survive. Right? The average life of those beings is not a good standard either. So I think of nature as amazing, but essentially amoral, right? It's not a good ethical standard. But the second question, it comes back to how you actually first started answering it, which is who matters and who warrants moral consideration and who gets our compassion. Because I think almost everybody has some sort of compassion for other beings. But the question is, okay, how far does that go and who gets to be included in our moral scope? Because as soon as you're excluded, frankly, you're in trouble because anything goes. So that would be really interesting to understand your story on, as well as this sort of who matters question. And you've already introduced it by talking about how you were thinking even at the age of 6. How did that happen that you were thinking about, family, friends, other humans, even globally about humans, and then about non-humans? How did that pattern play out? And again, where have you got to now in terms of how do you draw that boundary of moral scope?
Yeah, it's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly. There was a moment where this is the moment that I remember when I was 6, when I saw, which started me questioning it, which is where I saw a poster of a kitten having vivisection performed on them. And it was, it might have been PETA, or it might have been some other group kind of protesting against animal testing. And that's what started me thinking, like, why are we doing this to this kitten? And then I don't know.
That's a brutal thing to see at 6 years old.
Yeah. I still remember the image now. It's quite a famous image, but I still, I can still picture it exactly, the color of the kitten and everything. So I guess, like, at that point, we also got our first family dog at that age. And, we'd already had fishes at that point, who I loved, and who all died as fishes do, and every time we'd have a little ceremony for them. But it's like I guess at that point I was really kind of aware of animals, and I guess, like, for me, I have this instinct to go to the underdog, as it were, the group, or the being or whatever, who's being kind of least respected or least protected. So as a kid, I always used to be into, like, Disney movies, watching, the stories of animals, and I would never be interested in watching shows or films that had humans as a protagonist, because to me, human animals were like, the dominant force who was exploiting and hurting other beings. I don't know where that came from, but, like, all my toys were like little puppies instead of Barbies, or whatever little human version of things. So I don't know. I honestly don't know where that came from, but it continued. But as I got older and learned about different exploitations of human animals, obviously my compassion extended there. So I've done a lot of work, volunteering. I've done work outside of, the UK. I've spent quite a bit of time in countries in Africa, like working with people who have been, exploited and who are suffering at the hands of the West, essentially. And I believe that, it's really hard to kind of know exactly where that happened. But I guess as a kid, lots of young people have this kind of instinct to protect and to, have this kind of empathetic thing with animals. There was that study done recently that said that primary school children think that farmed animals should be treated the same as humans, and we kind of beat it out of them. And I guess I was lucky that my parents didn't do that, but me and my brother, for example, are very different. My brother, eats pigs like it's going out of fashion. He brought up the same as me, but went down a very different route. So yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
And that sense of affinity with non-human animals, I think, is fairly common with kids, but it's pretty uncommon to make the connection to the food on your plate in the same way you did. How did that process happen? At what point did you draw the line between the kitten on the poster and thinking about what you're eating? Because that happened very early for you as well, didn't it?
Yeah, I guess it was seeing the poster, having a relationship with our first, family dog, and talking to my parents about it and asking them, because I was told, this is a pig, so I remember eating ham, and I remember my parents, telling me like, this is a pig. So I would ask questions, so did we, I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but I'm presuming along the lines of, did we have to kill the pig to eat it or whatever?
Yeah.
And my parents told me the truth. So they would have told me, yes, we get animals and we kill them and we cook them and we eat them. And I was like, well, I'm not okay with that. I don't want to eat animals. So I guess it was probably just, again, this way that I was raised, which was more kind of open and honest and direct, I guess, was helpful in that capacity. And I was allowed to be nurtured in that. And, obviously my parents made the right decision because I'm still very much vegan.
But it's the openness and the transparency. They weren't hiding things from you. They were being clear and direct. But it's also respecting your opinion when you said, I don't want to be a part of that. That's quite unusual parenting, I think, in this day and age. Most people would be like, would constrain you in some way, probably emotionally, if not, and probably practically too. And just, don't be silly. This is what we do. Here's the list of reasons why it's normal, necessary, natural, and, so on and so forth. But so that's quite distinctive too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I see that around me with, when, I interact with young people who ask me, so, what are you eating? Why is it different from what I'm eating? And, I will tell them the truth because I respect them, and I respect them having their opinion, but then they'll go to, they'll come back to me the next time and be like, oh, my mum wouldn't let me buy soy milk or whatever, And you're like, well, yeah, you just stick by your values and at some point you'll be able to do it. But, a lot of parents don't, it can be difficult to know how to feed a child if you're kind of dependent on traditional, which is to say, meat eating, etc., as your nutritional kind of understanding of food and how to survive. My parents had been vegetarian previously before they had me and my brother, so they had already had experience in, creating vegetarian food at that time. We're talking like, early 90s. So they'd already had that experience in, feeding themselves, a nutritionally correct diet. But this is the other thing that kind of is difficult for me, because when you speak to when you have an attack from somebody saying, oh, well, you can't, raise a kid vegan, or you can't be vegan and be well. There was an article the other day in the Telegraph that said, a vegan life is a joyless life, stuff like this. You're like, okay, cool. It's very annoying because the people come to you so suddenly aware of the nutritional value of vegetables, and you're like, well, okay, have you thought about the nutritional value of your meat and dairy and your fast food and these refined processed meats, etc.? And of course they have no idea about fiber content. I divert, I'm going off on a tangent here, but essentially I think that one of the pieces of the puzzle is knowing how to eat and how to do that. And in this day and age it's a lot easier, because there are so many alternatives. But whether that's
at least in some places, yeah.
I think
you're right. There's such a strong cultural inertia, so that it's like an emotional response at first that I think blocks it. But there's a lot of practicality there as well. Like you say, it's like just shopping habits and knowing what to get, and And, and am I now going to have to prepare, 2 different meals for the family if we're not all going to go down the same path? So there's a lot of practical friction points that get in the way too. Yeah. And what was your journey like from vegetarian to vegan? Because mine was embarrassingly slow. So I went vegetarian about 22, 23, purely for ethical reasons, but for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into now here, but they were basically around a sense of social acceptability, right? It felt at that point like vegetarian was quite weird, but going vegan was really, really weird and really sort of disruptive. So I just sort of stopped there and then again deployed the full denial, avoidance, cognitive dissonance, just to not really engage in the reality of dairy and eggs and so on and so forth for probably another couple of decades, which is a bit frustrating. But so that was a really long journey for me, and I think a lot of people sort of get stuck there. But how did you go through that process of thinking about vegetarian into broader issues of different ways of exploitation beyond just having the flesh that you put in your mouth?
Yeah. It took me a while. I guess it took me a few years to realize what the dairy industry is, and I became. Well, I guess when I was like 10 or 12, I became involved in Viva, Vegetarians International Voice for Animals, and they were sending me, literature and again, posters and things like that. And there was a poster of like a cow, a female cow, and a man in a business suit, like underneath, like sucking the udders. And it's like, cut out the middleman. Yeah, I was like, that's genius. And so kind of like coming across those things started me questioning, like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that the dairy industry was also, hurting animals. So then I became vegan, but I then flitted backwards and forwards. So for practical reasons and like just kind of laziness, I guess, I let cheese kind of come back into my life. And I guess from the age of like 18 to like 28, I guess, I was kind of going backwards and forwards between vegan, vegetarian, and I was like largely vegan, but I would, end up having a bit of cheese.
Yeah.
And then, eggs and stuff like that. It all kind of slips back in. Once you kind of start closing yourself off to the reality, it becomes easy to, tolerate everything. But it was actually, it's funny because I went vegan, vegetarian for ethical reasons, but then the thing that's actually made me stick or has given me the best version of being vegan for me was health stuff. So I haven't had any health problems, but I came across Dr. John McDougall and his way of thinking the starch solution, and looking at the China study and all of these things and thinking about food and nutrition in a different way. Like actually being vegan can make you like live longer, it can give you health, it can give you longevity. And I'd never thought about veganism as a health thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then it was actually kind of looking at that and being like becoming aware of the blue zones, becoming aware of how to eat the most kind of nutritionally rich diet that you can, and that happens to be vegan. And it was doing that kind of made me finally not have any kind of push or desire for cheese or anything like that. Like I always craved cheese as a vegan, but it was just the kind of the moral thing that made me not, and then it made me slip because sometimes you slip. But it was actually doing the health version of being vegan, and kind of doing this whole food, plant-based, no oil, blah 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 approach that made it so easy. And I can honestly
just have to lock it in.
Yeah, you just have to lock it in. And I can honestly, I haven't craved cheese once since eating that way, since starting eating that way. And obviously I wouldn't be able to eat cheese again anyway ever. But I just haven't craved it, which makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. So it sounds like when we've talked about these two big ethical questions, there is a sense of valuing nature in itself, but also a very direct compassion for individual sentient beings, non-human animals and human animals as well. Is that how you might summarize your sort of ethical stance now? That it's because I guess part of the reason I asked that question is that's certainly my way of thinking. Obviously, in this sentientist way of thinking, says every sentient being matters. Needlessly harming them is a bad thing to do. Their flourishing is good. That's almost the raw material, if you like, of a well-grounded naturalistic ethic. so some people will criticize that and say, look, you've gone too far in your compassion. We need to focus just on humans, an anthropocentric view. Some people are even more aggressive than that and say only humans like me count, and we know where that leads, right? But there's also another criticism which says that sentientism isn't going far enough. And it often comes from people who see a lot of value in nature, because they say, look, yeah, the sentient beings matter, but what about the non-sentient stuff? Maybe plants, maybe the very super simplest animals, maybe rocks, rivers, trees, ecosystems, habitats, biodiversity. None of those things are sentient. They can't suffer in their own right, but don't they matter too? How do you think about, whether and how we should have compassion more broadly than sentient beings?
Yeah, I don't understand how you can not. I don't understand how you could separate these things from each other. They're all completely connected. It's like thinking that, what you eat isn't going to affect your mood, or your headache. It's like trying to separate parts of your body. Like you do this to your left hand, therefore you won't feel, you'll only feel it there, you won't feel it anywhere else in your body or whatever. I just feel like all of these things are so bound up together that to care about humans is to care about everything, is to care about everyone who we share this planet with, from plants to, non-human animals to mollusks to obviously all human animals as well. So I've never found a convincing reason why these things should be separate and why we should only care for one of those things. I've never found an argument that would make me go, oh yeah, you're right, actually only spiders matter, or only humans matter, or whatever. I've never been convinced of that. And
because everything is interconnected and interdependent. And
exactly, how can you separate these things from each other? How can we separate humans from non-human animals? How can we? It just seems absurd to me, and I guess it always has done. And I guess this, back to being raised kind of with an understanding and a respect for nature and the world around me. It's always been so abundantly clear that if we don't, have an awareness and have a respect and do what we can to protect, biodiversity and wildlife and, etc., then we're on a downward trajectory as a species and as a planet. So yeah, I guess it's just, there's no kind of satisfying kind of moment, I guess, that I can point to, but it just feels absurd to me that you would ever separate everything on this planet from each other and pick one thing to focus on, because it's all interconnected, and it does. The health and well-being of one being depends on the health and well-being of another, or of the planet, or of the atmosphere, or does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yes. And I think I share that view, because my sense is I am quite a strict sentiocentrist, if you like. I think that ultimately there is a set of beings, and it's difficult. The boundary is fuzzy. We should never be overconfident about where that boundary is. It's always moving as the science develops as well. So I'm completely open to the boundary of sentience being fuzzy and indeterminate, and we should be careful about where we set that. But I do think that wherever that boundary is, that it's an important boundary, because the things inside it can actually experience suffering and the things outside it can't. But the things outside it are still important because of their interdependency with the things that are sentient. So I care about rocks, rivers, trees, ecosystems, biodiversity, the earth, plants, because they're so critical to the flourishing of all of the sentient beings. But that's still different from having compassion for them in their own right. And I guess part of the reason I think that way is because there's another risk here for me in that, and you'll find a lot of people who are deeply invested in the environmental movement, or they will think in a maybe a biocentric or an ecocentric way that says it's not just about sentient beings, it's about ecosystems, it's about all living things, it's they all matter. And if all of those things matter, not just the sentient beings but the insentient beings, then there's no moral difference really between putting a knife into a carrot and putting a knife into a pig. And I'm like, no. I think you've made a fundamental mistake, because the freshly plucked, carrot does not experience anything negative as a result of that, and the pig clearly does. So although I would still care about the carrot instrumentally, and the rocks and the rivers and the trees and the other plants, because we're all interdependent, it's a different sort of caring than I have for sentient beings.
Yeah,
So
that makes a lot of
I should
sense.
have asked you the question instead of telling you my approach to it. But
No, it's
how
good.
much sense does that make?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I wouldn't have made that kind of separation myself. Like I recommend that you go and watch The Life of Plants, because since watching that, I now have a weird thing with plants where I'm like, oh, okay, I don't think we can say definitively that they don't feel pain. It's just in a different way to how we feel it, and obviously how non-human animals feel it, possibly. But I don't know. There's still a lot
And
to
just
be.
to be
Yeah.
clear, this stance of sentientism doesn't tell us which beings are sentient or not. It just says whatever sentience is, wherever it is, it matters. So if we find decent scientific evidence that plants are sentient, they matter morally too. That's just it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sentientism doesn't say only animals matter. It just says all sentient beings matter, and that could involve aliens, artificial intelligences, maybe plants. I mean, my understanding of the plant evidence so far is that their behavior and communications, the fungal networks and all that sort of stuff, are absolutely amazing and much richer than people had thought before. But so far, they don't seem to have any of the analogous architecture in terms of a centralized way of processing information that would give us any indication that they actually experience things. So I think they're awesome. We should keep an open mind. I haven't yet seen anything that indicates, or even anyone who actually claims, when you look at the claims, that they're really experiencing something subjectively themselves. But
no, I haven't either, but I definitely feel that, like I remember as a kid, again, this idea of animals having their own languages, like, and now we have more and more evidence of different ways of communication, in bonobos. Like, we know that pigs name each of their piglets, and we know, the language of dolphins and whales, etc.
yeah.
Like, and all of this has kind of emerged, like, over my lifetime, that people had a feeling that, animals had a language, or, it could just seem logically true, but then it hasn't been scientifically proven. So with plants, like, yes, you're right, there is nobody kind of actually, scientifically claiming that. But I would be on the fence of, like, well, we didn't know so many things about non-human animals, because we feel that, we kind of project our own way of understanding onto non-human animals. So, like, when you think, oh, a pig is as intelligent as, a 3-year-old or whatever it is, like, it's our version of intelligence that we're projecting, onto these non-human animals. Like, I just feel that there could be that we just don't understand the form of pain that plants feel.
Yeah.
It could be that we haven't got there yet. And they certainly, feel, sun and dark, and they certainly respond to negative, stimulus in a very, slow way, in a very different way to how we would ever like understand it. But to your point of, like, how wide is our circle of protection? I do believe that, ensuring that there's, protection of the soil, for example. If we don't support proper soil and all of that stuff, then we end up in a situation where we can't grow any food anyway.
Yeah.
But soil, you could quite safely say, at this moment in time, has not been proven to be sentient. So
but it still matters.
But it still matters. And obviously the worms who exist within the soil and who, are part of the creation of rich soil are of course sentient. I believe that's probably been proven, right?
I think so. I think worms are sort of close to the boundary, but I think there's decent confidence for many of the invertebrates, except the absolutely super simplest. So I think sea sponges have no nervous system at all, but and jellyfish, again, it's touch and go. But for many of the other invertebrates, including many of the worms, I think it's decent evidence there's at least some sort of basic sentience there. But again, but I like your approach in that we need to be humble, we need to be open-minded, and the more we've learned about non-human animals and plants, we've never found out, oh, they were simpler than we thought. It's always been more rich, more powerful, more diverse, more distinctive, and through that period we've learned that humans are always less special than we thought. We're just another dot on the evolutionary tree too. So I like exactly the idea of keeping that humility. The only thing for me is making sure that humility doesn't then undermine the confidence we do have, for example, in the very obvious highly valent sentience of farmed animals, and that that has to matter more, because otherwise there's a danger of falling back into this. Again, the Twitter troll version of it is, well, plants feel pain too, so I'm no worse than a vegan.
Yeah, I do think, like, when I was a kid, and I do think I kind of still fall down onto this now, is your point of, well, they have a central nervous system. So, we know those beings that have a central nervous system are very likely, if not scientifically proven, to feel pain the way that we do. And that's something that we can understand and easily stop doing.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what it comes down to. And then obviously keeping an openness and an awareness of how these different ecosystems and how these different, inanimate objects, and how plants and other things contribute to the richness of life for humans and non-human animals with a central nervous system.
Yeah.
I think that probably ties it.
I think it does, yeah. But you also make an important point, which again, it's understandable in a way that we start with ourselves as a frame of reference because we're human, so it's hard to completely avoid an anthropocentric starting point. And then we look for analogues elsewhere, and I think that's useful. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only way things work, right? And you can, people have already found that in non-human animals where they have a different neural architecture, where they don't necessarily have the same neocortex, but maybe their midbrain structures are analogous. So we have to be open-minded about the fact that there might be other ways of experiencing or other ways of feeling pain, as you've hinted at there. That's certainly true in the slightly sci-fi world of thinking about artificially intelligent sentience. None of those are likely to have a prefrontal cortex or a midbrain structure or whatever it is at the brainstem. There'll be bits and ones and zeros and so on. But who's to say there aren't other architectures or other ways of experiencing? So that humility is important.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point as well, because when we look at AI and when we look at a potential future of robot workers or whatever it is that we want to create, we start to see a troubling pattern of the way that the way that human animals treat these beings. And if we can quite easily leap to the idea that a being that looks and resembles physically a human, but doesn't have emotions and feelings, then and can't feel what you do to them, then what we do to them is stuff that that most people wouldn't want to do to a human. And we treat them in ways that we wouldn't want to treat people or at least want to admit to treating people. And we see it with animals as well. So when we look at the relationship between people who abuse animals or people who are working in situations where they, like slaughterhouse workers, etc., when they're kind of exposed to this kind of violence, when they're doing these things like time and time again, there is a tie to domestic violence. So people who abuse animals or or kill animals, there's a big relationship between that and serial killers. There's been a lot of studies into that, and then there's been studies into people in slaughterhouses ending up performing domestic violence. So I think this idea that we can I think it needs to be considered, and it needs to be approached in a way that doesn't mean like, oh, we've just created these bots or whatever who don't have any feeling, therefore we can just treat them however we want to treat them, because it starts to create a potentially dangerous link to treatment of actual humans. And we already see it with, for example, slaughterhouse workers and migrant workers. And there was that article just came out this week about migrant workers on fishing boats off the coast of the UK being abused and receiving £3.50 an hour and all of these things that they fall victim to. We're already doing it. So I think it's troubling when we start to kind of remove empathy or remove or not allow the kind of the growth and development of empathy and feelings towards all sentient beings, that it can lead to dangerous and more damaging situations.
Yeah, it can warp ethics in other areas and desensitize ourselves to exploitation and violence that can span across the species and even the substrate boundary. Yeah. Fascinating.
That's a much better way of putting it. My rambling.
No, I like. Thank you. It's an important link to make, because I think it also comes back to something we might talk about in this final question. Quite often, I don't think these things are really even trade-offs. It's like a win-win-win across environment, human and non-human, and that's just one area. I think if we can improve our ethical standards and our consistency when it comes to thinking about non-human animals, I think it will have enormous positive knock-on impact on intrahuman ethics too. But let's come on to that in this final. So this final equally crazily big question is, how can we make a better future? So one thing, I'd love to know if you have a vision of a sort of utopian future that we might be able to get to and what that might look like.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I am a kind of practical kind of, I guess, on the edge of rationalist type person. So it is hard.
I mean, the answer might be no, because we can come on to talking about the role of the media and sentient media and how to drive positive change now.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to check if you had a utopian vision.
A utopian, like in the ideal, like beautiful future, like, all beings living together, in well, I guess the answer would be no, Jamie. It's complicated, right? Because you can't say everything living in harmony with each other, because there has to be friction and there has to be, challenges, and it can't just be an easy life. We need challenges and we need things to overcome, like, as a planet, the relationships we have with different animals and within their own species, etc. Like it's not easy. So the kind of the natural instinct to say kind of like, oh, it's all beautiful, everyone's happy, like all the animals are free, like la 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 la. That's just a bit too simplistic and unrealistic. But I think that what would be great to see in the coming years is a development, is more understanding and openness. So this idea that we don't center farmed animals in the media, that we don't acknowledge that other beings have emotionally complex lives, to not allow that to be kind of front and center of the conversation when we're looking at such huge numbers compared to just the human animal population. We're like 7 billion people on the planet, 72 billion land animals. It's just warped that we're not centering their suffering that we've created, because that's down to us, that's down to our constructs and our approach to food.
And I don't think people don't understand that scale, right? Because from one perspective, just the sheer number of individual sentient beings, it's mind-blowing. As you said, right, 7.8, 7.9 billion humans, 72 billion land animals, 1 to 3 trillion aquatic animals that we farm and fish. So if you think, right, here's the pie chart of all of the sentient beings on the planet, individuals who have experiences. Humans are like a tiny little, almost invisible slice in there, but we've driven that scale and are causing suffering in all of the rest of the pie. But it's also true on the environmental side as well, because I would argue, and your articles have helped me understand this, the most visible and the most serious scale impact of humans on the face of the planet is not the humans, it's animal agriculture. And that's true in terms of land use and water use and most of the other metrics as well. So it's like a massive force multiplier of human impact that just isn't recognized.
Yeah, and it's super difficult to think about these numbers. And when we're talking to people, like if you look at education, if you look at how we communicate these ideas, like and in the media, you have to bring it down to one. You have to show the suffering of one being. So you mentioned at the beginning about how you might see a story about a farmed animal. It'll be an individual farmed animal that escaped. That's how we can picture it. We can't, in your brain, like you can't, unless you have, like very number centered mind, like you can't picture what 72 billion looks like. You can't picture what 7.8 billion looks like. You can't picture what a million looks like.
It's just inconceivable.
It's just, what, I don't care. It's complicated, it's big, and it's annoying. So I think that, like, you're right that it is so difficult to comprehend, and that is part of the reason why I think we don't cover it in the media. But another reason why we don't cover it in the media is there are, a small number of groups who control the meat and dairy industry. So it's not millions of organizations. It's a very small number of organizations who dominate. And in order for them to continue to dominate and to continue to make profit, it's definitely in their interest to ensure that this news and this information isn't shared widely. And a lot of the times you end up, if you watch BBC News, the expert that they get to talk about, a farmed animal issue will be somebody who's in the animal agriculture business. So we don't have this ability to kind of present unbiased news.
Well, who else would need representing in that conversation? You just need the farmers.
Exactly. So I guess, to answer your question of the future, like I would love to see a future where at least we present animals in a way that we can understand their sentience, in a way that we can start to question and start to allow more people to understand what's happening on this such, big scale. I think that would be a wonderful start. I think that if we were just thinking about climate crisis, if we were reporting on climate crisis and we every time we saw it mentioned, in the media, we started to see more frequency of talking about animal agriculture, as we did, with oil and fossil fuels. If we got to the point where it was like synonymous with climate crisis, that would be a wonderful, step forward. And I think that presenting people with, easy routes to having a very nutritious, very affordable diet would be great. And obviously it depends on where you are in the world, but I think that in the West, for a majority of people in the West, have access to, potatoes, dried beans, things like that. So it would be, a very simple kind of way to start talking about nutrition in a better way. And yeah, encouraging people to reduce the amount of meat and dairy that we're consuming in order to kind of really make meat and dairy industries feel the pressure. And we're seeing it, we're seeing more Ag-gag laws coming out, in the States and in Canada. We're seeing, labeling issues in the EU, people, meat and dairy, fighting against terminology that, vegan or plant-based meat is using. Like we're seeing them fighting back.
Pushback,
and exactly. Sorry, pushback's not fighting back, but yeah, they it's
both.
I feel like the plant-based, I guess I kind of feel like the plant-based companies are just kind of like existing. They're like, this is it now, this is the future. And the meat industry is definitely pushing back on them. But
it's a difficult,
I guess that
it's a difficult dynamic as well. And I sometimes draw some parallels between what we saw with the tobacco industry, and we're still seeing with the tobacco industry, and with big oil, and now with animal agriculture, because you've clearly got powerful forces who want those industries to continue, and many communities and families and many thousands, millions of people who depend on them economically as well. So there's a force saying, look, we want this message to go out and predominate. But you've got this weird situation where actually most of the consumers want to hear that message as well, because they want to be reassured. They wanted to be reassured that tobacco smoking was cool and didn't cause cancer. They wanted to be reassured that climate change wasn't really happening, because wouldn't it be better if it wasn't and we didn't really cause it? And they want to be reassured that animal farming can be humane. So you've got this strange situation where the lobbyists, are lobbying people who want to be lobbied, right? They really want to believe this stuff. The wishful thinking and the desire not to change and not to be challenged is really powerful.
It really is. And I think, the tobacco industry playbook, in the sense of like how the PR industry kind of pushed back, and the meat and dairy industry playbook, they're exactly the same. What we're seeing in the sense of like, exactly the same approaches, exactly the same things that they're doing. But what we also see, like with oil and with tobacco, think about oil for a start, like the way that they like Exxon, started their R&D labs in order to fight back on the idea of climate crisis in the beginning. In the very beginning, the media were reporting that climate change was real, and that this was happening, and it was scientific, and it was something that we needed to start acting on now, in the very beginning when it first started getting reported on. And then Exxon came in, started their R&D labs to kind of start creating question marks around it. And then we have all of the media reporting switches to, is climate change real? Like, is it a thing? Because Exxon aren't sure, it's like creating this question. It's essentially like they're delaying the inevitable, because every year they're in operation, they're creating more and more profit. And if they can just delay it by a year, then great, that's like millions of dollars for them. And the same with the tobacco industry, doing the exact same stuff. And also, interestingly, with tobacco,
and often with the same PR companies, the same lawyers, the same marketing teams. I can imagine the pitch deck where they said, "Look what we did for tobacco. We can do that for you." And it's the same people often, same playbook.
It's the exact same people in some cases. And with tobacco, like there's documentation of the media coverage of tobacco, and the more positive articles about tobacco smoking, obviously the more people consume tobacco. But then as soon as the surgeon, in the run up to when the Surgeon General's message got approved and got put on tobacco packets, there was a flurry of negative articles. So the number of negative articles that went out in the time leading up to when the Surgeon General's message was huge, and then the decline in sales happened, and then the Surgeon General's message goes on. So I feel like with meat and dairy, like if we can produce more content that is presenting meat and dairy in a negative way and making people question it, then we can lead into a way where we can even get the Surgeon General's warning on how do you, like, charcuterie, how do you say it?
Charcuterie, yeah.
charcuterie, and cured meat, and all of these things that have now been proven to cause cancer scientifically. Like, why don't we get some Surgeon General's warning on that stuff? But yeah, it's a good parallel, and it's definitely something we think a lot about at Sentient Media.
Yeah, and then in a way, that's part of the reason why I think with this sentientism idea, I want to make sure we're focusing on epistemology and facts and evidence and reason as well. Because some people will say to me, "Look, Jamie, this idea is all well and good, right? But don't we just need the compassion side? Don't we just need sentiocentric compassion? Isn't that enough?" And sometimes they'll say that partly because they're worried about the sensitivities of people who might have a supernatural worldview and so on. Who I'd absolutely partner with the common aim of driving the compassion side forward as well. So this isn't an exclusive thing. It's just saying we need the compassion, but we need the good, well-grounded epistemology as well. Because when you look at a challenge like animal agriculture, of course there's a problem of a failure of compassion. There are some people who just say, I don't care. But I don't think there's really that many. I think most people, instead of saying, I just choose not to care, they're not important to me, I don't care about the suffering of non-human animals, those people are quite rare. Most people rely on broken epistemology. So they'll say animals don't suffer, or farming can be humane, or, and the list goes on, or humans need to consume meat to survive, right? These aren't failures of compassion. These are just errors, factual errors. And that's partly why I think we need this combination of sentiocentric compassion and a well-grounded naturalistic epistemology, because arguably, if we do adopt that approach, it does make it harder for Exxon and the tobacco companies and the big agricultural companies to do what you've said, which isn't necessarily just say these things are perfect, but it's just breaks things enough, introduces enough uncertainty. It's a sort of global level, sort of gentle gaslighting that's enough to enable them to carry on. I think one thing that we've kind of alluded to throughout this conversation is the idea that people do pick and choose and take the facts and take the ideas and take the sentiments that they want to, that already reinforce how it is that they're feeling. So, for example, I subscribe to like a lot of the meat and dairy industry newsletters, and they go around, like I had one yesterday that said, animal agriculture only accounts for 4%, of emissions in the US. And if we if we cut out animal agriculture, it would only reduce our emissions by 0.7%, something like that, and you're just like, okay, cool. So it doesn't matter, because they found this information from some report and then kind of skewed it to fit their narrative. Like we've just published an article actually called one study, 5 different headlines. Like there's one report about diet change in vegan diet for children, and all these 5 different news outlets reported on it with completely different headlines. Even if we have the facts, every organization, every individual and every publication will present it and skew it to fit their narrative. So the Telegraph will make it into vegan kids are deficient in whatever, whereas Veg News would be like vegan kids are great, whatever. We always have this kind of media bias, and we always have biases within us. And I think that ultimately there isn't any one kind of answer, there isn't any one approach that works, but everybody's efforts and everybody's approaches combined are more likely to reach somebody. So whether it's a religious angle, whether it's empathy and compassion, whether it's data and science, like I feel that there is something there for everybody. And at Sentient Media we definitely try to cover all of those bases, and we do make sure that when we are reporting on studies, that they're peer reviewed, that we're looking at scientific journals. We're not we're not going down the route of just kind of baseless op-eds. We do put a lot of energy into our reporting and investigations to make sure that they're robust, so that when somebody forwards it to somebody else, they can't pick it apart and be like, oh well, it's just a bunch of vegans, blah blah blah. It's like, no, we're not we're not a bunch of vegans. We have a very diverse group of people writing for us, and it's and given the context where, in a weird sense, almost everybody disagrees with us, and almost all of the forces with power are pushing in a different direction. How do you think media organizations can break through that? Because, there are, in mainstream media outlets, there's the occasional person, there's like Chas Newkey-Burden at The Guardian, or, Henry Mance will do something on articles at on animals at the FT, or, Vox have done some great stuff with Kenny Torella. And, so there are, there are places where occasionally something will pop up and a journalist or a perspective will break through. There was the New York Times thing recently where it sort of failed at the last hurdle, but at least surfaced some of the issues. So those things occasionally randomly pop up in mainstream media, but I can imagine most of the readers of those articles just sort of, or most of the audience of those newspapers just sort of skip the article because it's like, I don't want to engage with that topic because I sort of know where it's going to lead. So I'm going to look somewhere else. And there's also a danger, I guess, with more specialized media like sentient media that, again, we end up sort of talking to our own audience and living with our own bubble. And how do you think we can avoid that challenge of being stuck within our own ecosystems, talking to other people who already agree with us and actually break out and have that wider cultural and societal influence we all want, and political influence?
Yeah, I love this question. It's something that we think about a lot, obviously, at Sentient Media. Like, to your point of just when an article gets into mainstream media that does center animals, like, do people even engage with it? And the answer is, based on a few samples that we've looked at, that they don't, that the drop off is quite high. So if you have a popular journalist reporting on other issues, and then all of a sudden they do a piece because they're vegan or because they're curious about food systems, whatever, that does center animals, then they do see like a drop off in views. So yes, that definitely is true. But to the point of how we get outside of the echo chamber, as it were, we at Sentient Media, we have a few different things that we do. So like our sentientmedia.org is kind of like the most visible, but the least representative of what we do. Essentially, a lot of our work is in digital services. So we know that when people are researching, the first thing they do is go to Google, right? That when people want to ask questions about, what is the meat industry, like, what is the poultry industry, how much does a dairy cow cost, like all of these phrases and terms that we Google, and we've seen an increase actually in searches around kind of animal suffering and intensive farming over the last few years on Google. But what we want to do is make sure that we're there, the other groups that we work with. We have about 15 different partner organizations who we work with and create content for. And we write long form articles that kind of answer these questions, and we base it obviously in fact and peer reviewed studies, etc. And as a result of that, we've managed to create content for around 4,000 different search terms that now ranks in the top 3 slots in Google. Wow. So that is reaching outside the echo chamber, like, because we're not, it's not a social media campaign. It's organic, real traffic, it's real searches. And we've reached millions of people through that. But then on top of that, we also have our writers collective community. So to me and to the people, at Sentient Media, we believe that in order to be visible and to start to shift these media narratives, we need people like all over the world to be, pitching articles that center animals, especially farmed animals, to local media outlets, and then to, national and then international. So if we can start to kind of create pockets of coverage across the globe, then we start to succeed in fully shifting these narratives. So we have this writers collective community. We have about 600 members at the moment. We're in about 30 to 35 different countries. And we have courses where we train people, how to go from advocate to journalist, how to create content that's going to be more visible, and how to pitch. And, your point at the very beginning about, an individual farmed animal is a great example of how to pitch a story and how to make sure that you're creating a piece of content that is going to be more likely to get published. So I think over the last 12 months, our community has published about 1,500 articles.
Wow. Yeah.
And but on top of that, we've pitched thousands of publications. So even if pitches don't get accepted, just by being there in an editor's inbox with this content, you start to create, oh, okay, maybe this is something that we want to report on. We had somebody
publish a sense that things are moving.
Yeah, exactly. We had somebody who was part of our Sentient Media Journalism Fund. He managed to get an article published in a Nigerian paper that was across the whole of Nigeria, talking about factory farming and climate crisis and zoonotic diseases. So it was like a huge achievement for him, and to see that actually in print across like the whole of Nigeria was just awesome.
It's amazing.
So yeah, that these are the approaches that we're taking to getting outside of the echo chamber, and I think that we have to do that, and if we're not doing it, then we fail. And we certainly won't shift media narratives by just like navel gazing and talking about it amongst ourselves. So yeah, we're this year we're hoping to build more kind of coalition, more partnership relationships with other organizations. We already have other publishers that we work with, and syndicating content and things like that. So brilliant. It's definitely it's definitely the front of my mind constantly.
Yeah, thank you. So people in your echo chamber, in your bubble, like me, will go to sentientmedia.org and sign up for your newsletter. But actually, the real power is the Writers Collective and the working with other publishers and the search work, which is getting out to the people we actually need to influence. So that's exactly. Fascinating. Thank you. It's great to have a look behind the scenes and see that influence. And the other thing that I find frustrating with mainstream media, and I'm continually bugging people on Twitter about this, is just their editorial standards about how they conceive of and discuss farmed animals. Just simple things like, why are you talking about how many tons of fishes there are? Why aren't you quantifying how many individual fishes there are?
Well, I mean, they can't, can they? Because we don't know. The one thing that annoys me is when they don't stick to their own editorial standards. So some articles, like in The Guardian, they say in their editorial standards that they will use pronouns if the sex is known of the animal. But then
that's already in the standards. But then
that's already in their standards, but they don't stick to it. There are articles that I have read that the gender is like a male piglet. And they refer to him as it. And you're like, well, it's in your editorial standards. Like, why aren't you sticking to it?
That's amazing. I didn't realize it was actually in. I'm not sure whether to be encouraged that it's already in the standards or annoyed that they're not following them. But I guess that's something. It should be
in actually the Associated Press. Like, it should be in anyone who follows that you do use a pronoun if the gender is known. So that should be standard. But nobody sticks to it, and certainly nobody uses it if there is no known gender. That's something that is very annoying and upsetting, because how can you use it for a living being, right? It just seems absurd. And apparently it's worse in the UK. Like, when I speak to people in the States, they say that actually when they speak to people in the UK, we always use it, and it kind of shocks them. But I don't know. That's just anecdotal. I think it is.
Well, let's look forward to a future where even mainstream media has a completely sentientist worldview when they're writing and commissioning their articles. And you and Sentient Media are doing a great contribution in pushing us towards that world. So, well, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your philosophical journey and your vision for a better future too. What's the best way of people following you, learning more about your work, signing up to Sentient Media, of course?
So sentientmedia.org is our website where you'll find access to our newsletter, to all of our social channels. We're on TikTok now.
Brilliant. My kids won't let me go on it yet. There is a Sentientism TikTok, but I've been too scared to post anything on it yet.
We've only just started. I'm not going near it. I'm passing that to much more able people than me. But we also have a monthly recap of the media news. So basically every month we do a 60-second roundup of all the news that we've gathered, that we've seen, that kind of talks about farmed animals, either directly or indirectly. And that's narrated by Jasmine Lever, who's the invisible vegan, who's awesome. And I don't know how she does it, because she has to fit in so much into 60 seconds. She's an absolute pro. But I'd recommend that for people if you're curious about.
And that's on YouTube too, as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's on YouTube. Yeah, on our YouTube channel. The Month in a Minute, it's called, and that's good for if you're curious about tracking how the media is reporting on animals. But head to sentientmedia.org, head to our YouTube channel, and get in touch. And obviously join up to our Writers Collective if you're interested in exploring how to write or how to pitch, or if you just want to write op-eds, if you want to do letters to the editor, whatever it is. Sign up to our Writers Collective community, and you can get access to mentorship. We have a huge range of people and different skill sets and different reasons for being there within that community. And you can sign up on our website. It's all free.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, thank you again. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and it's been great to have you as a guest on Sentientist Conversations.
It's been awesome. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you very much. Bye.